Let me start with this question. Other than if you're planning to have an adventurous trip, how many of us would we start any journey without knowing where we are headed, what our destination is, what our mode of transport is, or without having any plan? Is there anybody here who would do that? Unless it's absolutely meant for that, which is an adventurous journey. Awesome. So I always wondered with this question, then why we do this when it comes to finances, which is, if you look at our life, 1/3 of that goes into sleep. I'm not talking about the less than 7 or 8 hours of sleepers here, but on an average generally. And then if you look at your conscious life that's left over, within that, half of the time we spend working, which is essentially to fund our life. The reason I'm saying that, of course, there are a lot of other reasons why we would work and why we would do what we are doing today. But if I were to say, if I were to give you like maybe $5 million today, how many of you are going to do the same thing that you're doing today? So with that, I would assume most of the time that we are working is mainly to generate funds to fund our life. So I always wondered with this question why we do this. What I realized is there are obviously different stages of financial well-being, right? It's not that on day one we would reach this well-being stage. So all of us would go through this kind of a status. First, initially we start with ignorance. It's pretty much we don't know, what we need, and it's even important for us to focus on and so on, which comes from lack of awareness. Then we reach this stage where we know that it's an important topic, but it's not really a sexy topic. So we all try to avoid because it's complex, it's stressful, and it increases anxiety. So we avoid for the longest possible time. And then probably, after a point in time, we do realize we have to accept this, and we start getting into planning mode, whichever way we go about it. And then we start taking some action, whether it is through influence or some help or professional help, or yourself, gaining out of your experience, whatever you could do. And that's how we reach well-being state. So it's not an overnight journey. And often we always end up with this question on, hey, we keep hearing about all these different products and financial products, and I have no clue about this. I'm not really, I don't have any financial background, and who do I go to? But then every time I talk to somebody, they have a very narrow packaged products which cater to certain needs. But where exactly should I put all of this and see at what point in time of my life I need to go after each of these? So it's not really like a set in stone kind of a thing here, but at least it gives us a few buckets to think about. We start with essentials. Depending on your life stage, we start with how to budgeting, how to manage our subscriptions or income expenses and all of that. Then we take care of protection, any sort of protection. And this bucket becomes even more important in these times. Just to stress there, in the times we are in, think about yourself, your family, your dependents, or anything that you haven't really paid attention before. It's always good to spend some time and understand what that protection means and what kinds of protections, but understand that and take action. Then we get into a stage of tax planning, because we always want to be efficient with the hard-earned money, whichever way we can really make it more efficient to make the money work for us. So that's where we get to know a little more on tax planning and any such products that are available in all our countries. And we graduate to more diversified investments, and eventually we will reach a point. Again, it's never too early, never too late to plan anything with respect to finances. But one thing we realize too late is we might think, oh, I don't have so much money to plan about inheritance and write wills and so on. But we realize at a point in time that it is very important for each of us, and we may have to know anything that you're going to leave as a legacy, whether it is inheritance or any wills that you want to write. But today, what I wanted to walk you through is not that. That's all pretty much like a overview, a lot of information about how to just put things in perspective when it comes to finances generally. Like I said, I have been thinking about some of these questions and wanted to see what is the format, how do I proceed with this, and which decision should I make at what point in time in life when it comes to finances is what I was wondering. And I was playing with certain, I would say, a framework and then built a tool around it for myself, and I started sharing with my friends and family again, which worked for a lot of them because it makes their job a little easy in terms of coming up with all the calculations and whatnot. So thanks to my wife, that's why I acknowledge that, because this is something that both of us together over the years developed and have been primarily using for our sake. But what the way it helped me is mainly to focus on important things in life, make decisions, better decisions, and easily. And it gives me a feeling that I'm getting closer to financial success. Do we say if we have answers to these questions, like the big questions, how much is really needed? What are we working towards, or how by when can we reach there? What do we have currently, right? And is there a way for us to look at things to focus on? If we have answers to this, would that be helpful? Right? So these are the questions that I started with again, and wanted to know how that really, it's a pretty complex problem to start with, but that shouldn't stop us. We can always start with something and see if it really works for us or not. And that was the starting point. The framework around this is, if you look at it, it's pretty straightforward and simple, right? Okay, fine. So let's look at what we have, what we need, based on our goals and needs and life plans that we can think of as of today. And if we know those two, we can see the delta, whether it is positive or negative over the period of time, right? And then if we have the levers to play with, then we can decide how to really make that delta positive if we are in a negative delta at some point in time in life. So that's the whole framework or approach for this, in order to answer those questions and help us plan our personal finances, not just for today, not for tomorrow, not just for 5 years, but this whole effort is to do, as you stand today, what does it look like between now and the rest of your life? And of course, nobody denies, all of us are aware, life is what happens to us while we are making other plans, but by no means that says we shouldn't be planning. All right, so if you looked at that, in order to know for what we have, it consists of a few components. One major thing that really lets you have whatever you have today is your income and expenses, and whatever is left over as part of your earnings is one area, one big area. All of us heard enough how important that step is or how helpful that is, but I'm not really sure even if 5 to 10% of us really did that exercise at least once, sitting meticulously, not just at a high level. Of course, if you're really trying to go get a mortgage, maybe you put something together, but meticulously sitting and drafting down what exactly is your income, what are the components that are going out, and how much are you saving, having a look at that. Now, if you really have to do that exercise now, if you don't do anything, just do that one exercise now. I think you will have great learnings, mainly because a lot of things have changed in our lifestyle as well, right? Pre-COVID, post-COVID, with work from home, less commute, things like that. So a lot of components have moved, and we might have something to plan around. And the second step is to list everything that we have currently, any assets, investments, stocks, pension pot. We might not think of certain components that we already have, because that doesn't really come in day-to-day life. It doesn't show in your payslip, or on a regular basis, you don't pay attention. All we think always is, a lot of us at least, whatever comes into our bank through our payslips, that's all our earnings, which is not true. So even in the first step, I would recommend strongly going back and looking at your stock statements, understand what is vested every single year, which also adds up to your overall income and the bonus, right? So understand all the components and get familiar with that figure, right? And in terms of assets and investment that you currently have, look at everything that you currently own, assign the values to that, and see how it looks, which we don't do often. In addition to that, there is also some sort of an annual contribution that we make. Some of us might be making different, depending on which life stage you are in. If you have any kids, you might be paying towards their education plans, or you might be contributing towards your pension, or whatever that is. So consider all of that and put them together. So those two will let us know what our haves are as of today, and then we can always extrapolate based on certain assumptions over the years to see what they would look like over the years. And the third step is to understand our biggest life needs. This is a big exercise again, and very important one. Again, like I said, we don't know what's going to happen down the line 5, 10, 20 years. But as you stand today, you can foresee certain things. And if anything significantly changes, you can redo this exercise. But as you know about yourself and your situation today, you can always put an estimate on what is that you need. The biggest ticket items I'm talking about, whether you want to buy a big car or a house or build an education fund for your kids, all those kind of big ticket items. So if you were to think about it, think anything that costs you more than, let's say, at a point in time, let's say 10 grand, put in there. List those things, and then let's see what those needs look like. And one of the biggest needs here is to fund our lives post-retirement. Now, we always think it's too early to think about retirement, but it's never too early. And there is a life after your active working life stops. There is X number of years that we need to fund our lives. We'll see how much or what tune of what amount that we really need in order to fund that in a moment. But that's one of the biggest life needs, in addition to whatever our goals are or our needs are. So that's the third step. And the fourth one, once we have these inputs, we will be able to have a delta and see whether it's positive or negative. But again, we don't need to necessarily become anxious on, oh, what if it turns out negative? And then what if it turns out too positive? Should I stop working today? Or if it's too negative, then what am I going to do? But it's always an effort to see in the directional sense where it's all headed. And finally, depending on that result, how it look like, you will be able to identify the levers that you can play. So that's the whole framework and the approach or a methodology. In order to do this, obviously, all the inputs come from you for yourself. My persona here is we made Will, who is in his late 30s, who has a kid, who has a working partner, how he had put his needs and all the steps that we spoke about, his income, his expenses, because it's so personal. It's very, it won't be great to share just one of our details here, but at the same time, we don't want to leave it with conceptual thing because we also want to get into the procedural. So this is based on a persona. If somebody had to run this through, how would it look like and what it means to them? And therefore, you can go back and work on your personal numbers. Now, it may take a couple of hours for you, but end of the day, it's as good as how much interest you show, how much effort you put in, because it's your finances. So as we said, let's look at the haves because of all those 5 steps. The first one is knowing your income and expenses. Now, Will had put together all his expenses on the left-hand side on a monthly basis to see what that annual expense would look like. And on the right-hand side, any net annual income. Net annual income is a post-tax income that one may get. So different people may have different the income that Will has and the expenses here, obviously the delta is in this case positive. So we can continue with the exercise. But if this turns out to be negative, his family income here is, let's say 100K, family expenses annually is 80K, so he saves about 20K every year. But if this turns out to be negative, you can drop off this call, and that has to do with a different way of going about it, because that's the major problem that one has to work on to make it either break even or positive on a monthly or annual basis, your income versus expenses. The only solution there is to reduce expenses or increase income and going forward from there. But for our sake, in our exercise, this is what you would do for your personal number. And the exercise here is meant to make sure we also go through that journey and understand what our numbers look like. So it gives us an opportunity to do that exercise and just put this. Again, like I said, if you don't do anything, as a takeaway from this, if you just do this one step, that itself will be very beneficial, I would say, for each of us. One thing I realized is if you don't tell the money where to go, you will wonder later where it went. So it's always good to see what is that you're actually saving and have a plan for that. Second step, and this is also part of halves, right? So in halves, we wanted to see how much we are getting and how much we are spending and how much we are saving. And the second part in that halves is looking at all the current investments or assets or anything that one may have. Again, By the look of it here, this might look like, oh, this guy has a lot, or this guy has nothing, or whatever that is, but this is one of the personas. And like I said, a lot of times we ourselves don't even realize that some of these components that we have, we never realize we already have those components. For example, I don't know how many of you here know how much is there as of today in your pension pot, or how much are you really contributing towards your pension. I didn't know until I started these exercises a few years ago, right? Um, but this is divided into two parts again. The top section talks about all the assets and investments and everything that one has. At the bottom section is anything that we continue to contribute towards, like let's say pension or anything else on an annual basis. So we take this into account. Again, the only input that one needs to give in here is list of these items and the estimated amounts that they think what they value as of that day. Obviously, by no means you can be very accurate, and you might wonder, how would I know what this costs, and how would I know certain information if it's an estimate? Your best friend is Google there. I'm sure you get all the answers. But a lot of these values are already available with you if you put that effort to access your accounts and go look at them. Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, and you always realize the power of compounding. The earlier you start, the better it is over a period of time. All right, so the third step in that framework is understanding the post-retirement needs. Now, one of the biggest life needs. So we are getting to the stage of understanding what our life needs look like, but I wanted to separate what our post-retirement life looks like, and think of how you want to lead your life. It's difficult, but there are certain components. By looking at your lifestyle today, most of them may continue. A couple of them may drop because of a change in your lifestyle. Your kids may go away, and then you may not have a mortgage to pay, hopefully, and so on. But list them down and list the values as of today, what it would cost. Right? Don't worry about the inflation and all that's at this point in time, but all of that would be accounted for, and we get to see, in order to fund that life after our active work life stops or active earning life stops, what is that amount on a monthly basis that one would need to support that lifestyle? There is a way to calculate. There is something called a multiply by 25 rule or a 4% rule that we can Google about those, but there is a method to that madness to arrive at an approximate number, what we would need to build towards our pension pot by the time we retire. And this exercise, or this particular step, is only mainly to address that what our life needs look like, and because one of the biggest life needs is what is that pension pot or retirement pot should be there to support our post-retirement life. Again, one thing here, a good quote is, the question isn't when you want to retire, it's all about how much you need to have. So this exercise or this step is a very important one, and a lot of calculators, or if you to go to any investment consultant, they will also do this exercise for you, but it's all can be done something with multiply by 24 rule or a 4% rule, which is what the tool does. So you don't need to worry. All you need to worry about is if you are doing this exercise for yourself, listing the line items that you think how your life would look like at that point in time. All right, so that was only one part of the entire life needs, because as I said, we wanted to know what we have, we wanted to know what we need, and as part of the needs, think about everything between now and the rest of your life, depending on how you think, what you think would be your post retirement, or up to then, what are the biggest ticket items that you need to spend money on, whether it is to buy a house or to invest on something that you're very passionate about, or to clear off your mortgages or anything. Now, once we have that, we have all the needs that we think about and we evaluate it, and we also know the values of everything that we have currently and how they grow over a period of time, from our savings and from our investments and everything. And this is the output of the tool. Then it just gives you what that delta looks like. And what you see here is, over a period of 5 years, sample of 5 years from now, what does it look like based on your inputs here? In this case, Will has given his inputs in terms of what his income looks like, savings look like, investments, and his needs in terms of his paying for kids' education and post-retirement and everything. Based on all of that, the tool has given the output of looks like most of the needs that Will has at this point in time. If the status quo continues, he should be good, except for, I think, after 20 years, because that's when he would retire, and he would also by then should have built a pension pot and should have taken care of the mortgages and everything that he had his goals in his life that he listed there. Shows a negative of, let's say, 300K plus here. Now, this is something to look at on a directional basis and not really as an absolute numbers. So at least here, Will knows how it goes. Should he continue the status quo? Should he change the levers drastically? Or is there anything that he can do if there is any negatives that he sees over a period of time? And from there, he can take action based on the levers that he has. And the levers essentially are, if you looked at the overall approach, either there is you increase the income or reduce the expenses or increase the growth rate of your assets and everything that they're growing at a rate of, let's say, 3% or 4%, if you figure out a way to make them grow better, or increase your working tenure. If he wanted to work for 10, 20 years, he may want to work for 25 years now, or the other way around, depends on whether the delta is positive or negative. So these are all the levers that he has. Or he thinks, you know what, I should reduce one of my needs. I wanted to sponsor my kids' education by X amount, and probably I need to reduce that. Or I wanted to buy an expensive car, I can reduce that. Or if the delta is really positive and he can actually afford a lot more than what he thought. So those would be at least something that he would know as part of this output and takes decisions. Now, just to see, in this case, if Will made one change by saving $500 every month, right, the delta comes down significantly. So it is totally up to Will in terms of where he can put the effort before even taking the action and seeing whether that makes any impact, bigger impact or not. But like I said, the levers are, because the whole framework here is what you need, what you have, and look at the delta. And the levers here are how long are you working or continuing that status quo of your savings, at what rate are you growing them, your investments or savings or whatnot, or what have you listed as your big life needs. Do you want to increase them or reducing them? So this is what you would do to make your life look better. But again, this is all in terms of numbers. But as I said, don't take it as absolute numbers and treat, okay, this is what we're going to have after 10 years or 15 years, but this is more directionally what you think your life should look like and based on what you have. This is simply going back to the same analogy as if you want to buy a car today, what would you do? You would want to know what it costs. You'd want to see what you have and see if you have a plan to bridge the delta if it's negative, or if you have more, do you want to buy a bigger car or a better car? So it's more or less the same logic there. But essentially, going back to my earlier point, it is you who own your personal finances. Unless you are aware of it, and unless you acknowledge the fact where you are, and what your situation looks like today, it doesn't lead to any action. But once you do have those two, it leads to action, and that leads to well-being. But you are the owner, you are the driver. It is as good as your effort and interest. Again, this is not a one-time exercise. This is something that you probably could do or should be doing every time there is some significant change in your life, or once in every 2 years. So I especially do this once every 2 years. The kind of confidence and assurance and decision-making power that I got gives me a lot of stress-free time when it comes to finances, even in these difficult times.